Bonjour, ma chère famille. I'm Mary Ann Julia Fackrell, John and Caroline's oldest daughter. I was born on September 23, 1838, in St. Peter, Jersey. If you ever fly to Jersey, you'll see the countryside where I was born because the airport is in St. Peter. All my younger siblings were born in St. Helier, which isn't too far away. Now that I think of it, no place in Jersey is too far away. The entire island is a little smaller than the town of Gilbert. We spoke English and a dialect of French called Jerrier, or Jersey. I've always been proud of my ancestors and idolized my parents. I named my oldest son John LeSueur Fackrell. When I was 10, William Dunbar came to our island with his wife and 3 children. He was from Scotland and had a thick Scottish brogue, but the most notable thing was what he told us about a boy who saw God and organized a church with 12 apostles. He invited our family to join, and we were baptized, along with many others. In 1850, John Taylor organized the French mission, which included Jersey. My parents grew to love and respect him during the 2 years he presided. He assigned John Pack to be our leader on the island. Elder Pack helped us when we arrived in Utah. One of Brother Dunbar's daughters got sick and died while she was in Jersey. He returned to Liverpool with his family and they sailed to America. Tragically, the steamboat they took from St. Louis exploded, killing his wife and children. Brother Dunbar was seriously injured, but eventually recovered, remarried, and made his home in Utah. My mother's younger sister, Mary, emigrated to the United States in 1851 with her 3 children. It made us eager to go, but we couldn't afford it. Her husband, John Duhamel, booked the voyage, but didn't accompany them because he died a few months before the ship sailed. Philip Murray, a longtime family friend from Jersey, was also on the Olympus with his 4-year-old daughter, his wife having died a year earlier. Aunt Mary and Uncle Philip married after arriving in St. Louis. It took them months to prepare before they could travel to Utah, and Aunt Mary was 9 months pregnant when they started. My cousin, Mary Ann Murray, was born in a covered wagon near Kearney, Nebraska. When she was just a few days old, the wagon she was riding in turned over while crossing a river, and she ended up on an upturned table floating down the river. The man who roped and pulled the table to shore was surprised to find a baby cradled between its legs. Aunt Mary decided she had had enough, and they remained in the Midwest for 3 years before completing their journey to Utah a year before we did. They lived not far from us in Bountiful. Uncle Philip was a good friend of my father. He and Aunt Mary died fairly young. Their 4 children were adopted out and grew up not knowing each other. When my mother's aunt and uncle, Elise and Jean LeGrayley, joined the church, they contributed to the Perpetual Immigration Fund, making it possible for our family to receive financial assistance. We borrowed from the fund with a promise to repay as soon as possible after arriving in Salt Lake City. My sister Jane and I were the only children old enough to remember details of our journey to America and the Rocky Mountains. We didn't sail to New Orleans like Aunt Mary because the church stopped sending members there a year before we came. After a 34-day voyage, we cheered when a pilot boarded and steered our ship up the Delaware River to Philadelphia. On the left was Delaware and on the right was New Jersey. You might think we felt a little nostalgic when we heard New Jersey, but we were too busy sewing tents and wagon covers for what lay ahead. Our French-speaking friend, John Taylor, welcomed us when we reached Philadelphia. After 2 days of rest and a little food, we took the train to Pittsburgh, then a steamboat down the Ohio and up the Mississippi to St. Louis. From there, we steamed up the Missouri to Atchison, Kansas, and walked 4 miles west to Mormon Grove. Mormon Grove was a neatly organized tent city built on 160 acres of church-owned property near a hickory grove. It had a perimeter sod fence to contain livestock, a 20-acre vegetable garden, and plenty of room to stage large wagon trains. We obtained supplies in Atchison, where some were able to work for wages. The weather was lovely, It seemed like our church leaders had thought of everything. We were assigned to travel with the Charles A. Harper Company, consisting of 238 Perpetual Emigration Fund and 67 independent passengers. On July 25th, we started for Utah with 39 wagons, 440 oxen, 30 cows, 1 horse, and 1 mule. The people in our company were a mixture of English, French, Welsh, Italians, and Jersey Islanders. We were in the 6th Perpetual Immigration Fund Company and the last wagon train to leave Mormon Grove that season. It was disbanded the following year. If you get a chance to visit Mormon Grove, you'll find a historical marker that reads, Mormon Grove, the city that disappeared. Our wagon train captain was a well-educated wheelwright and carriage maker who was a Quaker before joining the church. He crossed the plains to Salt Lake with Brigham Young and again with Heber Kimball. He was returning to Utah after serving the 3-year mission in England, and we were lucky to have his leadership, trail experience, and professional skills. Our first significant challenge was crossing the Big Blue River. Although a ferry boat was available, Captain Harper tried to save money by fording it. The water was deep, the bank was steep, and only half the wagons crossed before the river rose and became impassable. Captain Harper waited 8 days before exchanging one of our wagons as partial payment to ferry the rest of the company across. While we waited, we cooked more food for the trail and collected bushels of wild plums and grapes. When General Harney arrived with 700 soldiers from Fort Leavenworth, Captain Harper used the ferry because he didn't want to lose his place in line. The soldiers passed our company on the other side of the Big Blue, and it was a comfort to us because the Sioux Indians were on the warpath. We followed the Little Blue River northwest into Nebraska, then along the Platte River for 600 miles. The Platte River is a shallow, braided river in a gently sloping valley that headed precisely where we needed to go. It provided us with food and water, and I wondered if God hadn't put it there for us. Great herds of buffalo amazed us before becoming a nuisance by stampeding our cattle. Although we had several encounters with the Sioux, they never attacked us. Our main struggle was keeping our oxen healthy enough to pull the wagons. When we left the Platte River, the road got rougher, the grass was scarce, and our oxen started to give out. Captain Harper sent word ahead that we were in good health and asked for fresh cattle. Near Independence Rock, some Sioux tried to force tribute from us by stationing a man in the road seated on a buffalo robe. We pushed on nervously. The Indians continued alongside us all day, loading their guns and making hostile demonstrations. Later, relief wagons from Salt Lake arrived, and we camped along the Sweetwater for 10 days so the cattle could graze and regain strength. That's where I celebrated my 17th birthday. After quite an ordeal to get more shoes and nails for our oxen, we got them shod and crossed Devil's Backbone, where large pieces of rock projected from the earth. We passed 9 dead oxen on our way. At Green River, there was good grass, but more cattle failed before we arrived at Fort Bridger. When we reached the Weber River and camped at Big Canyon Grove, we danced, sang, and presented a memorial of thanks to Captain Harper. We arrived in Salt Lake on October 29, 1855, the last family train of the season. We crossed an ocean and a continent in 7 months, walking 1,000 miles in 96 days. I didn't know how I could be so happy and bone-weary at the same time. John Pack helped us find a place to stay on his farm in West Bountiful. You know it as Woods Cross today. Two of his wives lived in a log cabin there. One of them was Mary Jane Walker, a friend from Jersey who immigrated 3 years before we did. Soon after we moved to Bountiful, Martha Fackrell, a neighbor, asked me if I would become a second wife to her husband James. It caught me off guard, and I inquired what prompted her request. She told me they had been married for 5 years and couldn't have children. She wondered if it was because of the disparaging remarks she had made about plural marriage. It took her 5 years, but she repented and changed her heart. When she did, she soon became pregnant and felt it was a sign from heaven. After consulting with James, she came to me. Martha was sincere, and I was touched. I consulted with my parents and my friend Mary Jane Pack, who was in a plural marriage. I also had more conversations with Martha and James to ensure they hadn't changed their mind. It was a wrestle, but I finally decided to marry James. He was an honorable, upright, and industrious man. Martha had her first child in January, and James and I were married in June of 1856. I lived the rest of my life in Davis County, mainly in Bountiful, but for a time farther north in Eden. James and I had 11 children. 2 died in infancy and 2 died in their youth before marrying. Of our 7 children that survived to adulthood, 3 were born in Bountiful, John, Ella, and Seymour, and 4 were born in Eden, Willard, Anna, Christina, and James. My husband died in 1892, 20 years before I did, but he left me in good financial condition. My 7 children and many grandchildren were a delight and a comfort. I enjoyed good health most of my life, except the last year when I suffered from a heart condition. On January 14, 1912, when I was 73, my heart failed, and I returned to my Maker and loved ones. I was buried in the Bountiful Cemetery.